Hello everybody, welcome to the second episode of the Papercast. This week I am with Chloe Brimicombe, who has written a paper in Earth's Future, the journal Earth's Future, entitled Borderless Heat Hazards with Bordered Impacts. Welcome Chloe, how are you?
I'm great, thank you for having me here to talk about my paper.
It's a pleasure. I'm very grateful for you to come on as a guest, because you are only my second guest, and it is already difficult to find people to come on and talk about their papers, which is odd because normally if you get a PhD student and you say, can you talk about your work, they won't stop talking, but no one seems to want to do it recorded.
Yeah, but hopefully, second one, you're going to get on a roll, you're going to keep talking to people, and it's going to be great.
Hopefully, yes. Maybe people just don't want to talk to me. I need to change my email picture to something slightly friendlier. I don't know.
What, like a friendly little squirrel or something?
Yeah. I think people would be easier to find it easier talking to a friendly squirrel than this ugly mug. I don't know. So I wondered if you could start by just very briefly summarising the paper to give people watching and listening an idea of what they're letting themselves into over the next however long.
So the paper is about heat stress, in particular in heat waves, and we focus on three main August heat waves in 2003, 2010 and 2020. And August 2020 was the inspiration for this paper. I wrote an article for a publication called The Conversation, talking about how heat waves are an invisible risk in research and also in policy, and we wanted to communicate that better, especially focusing on August 2020 in August, because there's been notable heat waves that have killed thousands of people and not many people have been reporting it, which we thought was a massive issue. So we looked at a heat stress index called the Universal Thermal Climate Index, and we showed that heat stress was growing in the month of August over 2000 to 2020, and that was in area and also in intensity, and a lot of people were now impacted, but this didn't come across in meteorological organisation reports effectively.
Okay, fascinating. So, just sorry, I hope my making notes doesn't distract you, but I think of questions and they fall out of my head within seconds, so I'm trying to write them down. So you mentioned that heat waves are obviously an invisible phenomenon. Does that, do you think, make it sort of, is it an impediment to researching heat waves or to people taking them seriously, sort of the general public, whereas compare it to a flood where you see on the news loads of water, obviously, and, people's dogs and babies floating down the river.
Not their babies on the news.
Do you think that has an effect on, maybe even how many people want to look at it because it's sort of not overt and obvious?
So definitely. So, there's this thing called the availability bias. And basically, if something is presented as a risk in the media or when we're talking about it, we're more likely to then think of it as a risk. Whereas with heat waves, in a lot of developed countries particularly, you think of it as an opportunity to go out with your mates, go swimming, get the paddling pool out, have a good time with your friends. But what people aren't realising is that older people or infants or people that work outside, this actually has impacts on them that could result in their death, which is really alarming and quite scary. But so recently, leading on from this paper, we were looking at the Pacific Northwest heat wave, and if you look at Google search trends, people were searching flooding during that heat wave more than heat waves, which is ridiculous because that was most record-breaking heat wave that region had ever had, and there was research to say that it would have been impossible without climate change. Whereas the same research on flooding showed that it was only 1 to 9 times more likely with climate change. So we're definitely seeing an increase in this and this intrinsic link to climate change that we can actually characterise through these events and say, actually, I think this is getting a lot worse, let's stop this now.
Yeah, that would be good. Whether or not that will happen,
we'll see.
We'll see. I think you just mentioned there that heat waves are underreported, especially compared to things like floods or fires. Thinking about America recently. As a Brit, it feels like heat waves are always being reported on. Is that something that is the case in the UK? Is it different in other countries, or do I have a bias about what I think I've seen reported? Because it just feels like, at least in this country, the front page of every newspaper is always, you look at the Mirror and every day it's either going to be record heat or snowing, according to them.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. Yeah, they always say that. But then if you also look at this time of year, I think it was like, they were like, it's catastrophic storms. I think they were also saying it's definitely going to snow by the end of November.
Yep.
It's like very catastrophic in the way they report things. But most of the time, actually, I don't know, because in the UK, there are less reports in the UK media-wise, in America, in English-speaking countries, if that's the media, whether that's policy, whether that's meteorological organisation reports. They do talk about heat waves, but they talk about it in terms of it was like 46 degrees Celsius, record-breaking temperatures. Okay, that's great, but what does that mean? They never do that next step. So, this year, the heat wave in the UK caused the death of potentially 400 to 800 people in 3 days. In America, it caused the death of over 1,000 people. That's a lot of people dying. I don't know where that's been in the media. I don't know whether that's not really causing any policy change. Whereas if you look at the reporting on floods, you'll know that maybe up to 200 people died in the German floods. You'll know that the German government are looking at policy changes and that they will probably maybe make them. But, you don't see that same interaction between the media and policymakers for events like heat waves. And it's probably coming back to what you said, them being invisible. And that's kind of what this paper wanted to address, that they are affecting a lot of people and these people don't really know about this.
Yeah, so you just highlighted that maybe what I was seeing on the media was this sort of focus on temperature. It's like, is it going to be a record-breaking summer? Is it going to be, nice on the beach in summer? And it's something you actually highlighted in your paper, that it's not just the British media that are obsessed with the number, how many degrees Celsius is it, or if you're an American, Fahrenheit. It's also these meteorological organisations that seem to also just focus on temperature, and you suggest that other metrics might be more useful, and maybe that's what you were talking about. It's the effects. It's how many people does it put in hospital? How many people does it unfortunately kill? Like, are those the things that you're talking about would be more helpful than just the number on the thermometer?
So we look at heat indexes. That is what my research really focuses on, and the one we use in this paper is called the Universal Thermal Climate Index, and this addresses heat stress, which is a build-up of body heat, in this case as a result of external environment. So it's really hot. You can take into account things like humidity, how the sun is radiating on your body, and wind speed. And all of these things together impact how your body sort of deals with heat and deals with the thermal environment, we call it. And this isn't addressed by single numbers in meteorological organisation reports. And what we find is that in previous research, heat stress is correlated with mortality rates in these countries. And we're seeing that more and more So the threshold for the UTCI for you having a raised likelihood of having mild heat stress is 26 degrees Celsius. That's not the same as temperature, and I have to keep saying that to people. It's very difficult for people to understand that degrees Celsius can be for other things just than just temperature, because it's how someone responds to their environment. And we do see in Europe particularly a rise in mortality rates over 26 degrees Celsius, but we also see that in Africa and in the tropics, that over 26 or over 32, which is the next one up high, is having these impacts, but they are less reported in these regions, so it's more difficult to make that link. But they do indicate a heat wave, which is important because you could use heat stress indexes to go on to link the forecasting of heat waves and sort of health impacts or infrastructure impacts or like crop impacts, and warn people about them in a way that you can't just do with a simple temperature. It's all about the understanding and how people interact with their environment, especially with climate change, because they're going to have to change the way they interact and adapt to these things. So that's why it's better, really, in a way.
Yeah, I think people have a real issue with indexes, and I think it's because they're not inherently understandable. You see a number, and especially if you see units next to it, like degrees C, you go, oh, that's the only time I ever see degree C is on the news when it's saying it's going to be, or on the weather when it's saying it's going to be 27 degrees. So this universal, what is it? Universal
Thermal Climate Index.
Thermal Climate Index. Sorry, I couldn't memorise that. Is
I get it wrong sometimes, if I'm honest.
I bet, yeah. I have a thing with acronyms and initialisms. They just fall out of my head immediately. I'll read a paper and, you know, the first paragraph they'll mention something. Oh, yeah, it says in the first
paragraph, and then you're down and you're like, what's this acronym mean? I don't remember.
I've only just, the one that comes up the most for me is Leaf Area Index. It's the only one I've remembered is LAI. And I had to think about it then. It's the only one that's sort of soaked in to my consciousness. The rest of them, I'm just always going back. Well, what does TH mean? What does, XYZ mean? So annoying, but it's, helps you write these things slightly quicker. So maybe you could, you already started to do it, but maybe you could really clearly break down, not exhaustively, but how you arrive at this 26 degrees C, which is not a temperature, it's a value on this index. Where does that number come from if it's not the thermometer?
Yeah, so the UTCI was developed as part of a European initiative to look at how the body responds to different thermal environments, so whether that's really cold or whether that's really hot. So it considers meteorological parameters, as I was saying, of radiation, how that is influencing our body, temperature, dew point temperature, which is then converted into a type of humidity, and wind speed. And basically what this index does is it passes this through a body model, so how our body then would interact to these parameters. And this, unfortunately, one of the limitations is this is based on a white European man walking, but it's kind of more accurate than if you were to use meteorological parameters alone. And then this gives out these values. So this is then being correlated to look at things like mortality, and also like with surveys of how people have found different temperatures, and correlated to the heat stress that was recorded. And it's all been found that about 26 degrees Celsius is when you start having raised likelihood of vulnerable people, so over 65, infants, people that work outside, pregnant women, all of these people start experiencing heat illnesses, and then also raised mortality rates that go along with that, so more people die. And that's all come out of this study. And then it was developed further, and a data set made of it through the ECMWF by one of my supervisors, well, a group of my supervisors, and it's now going on to hopefully be a forecast index to help with explaining heat illnesses and health impacts and heat impacts. Hopefully sometime next year, but
no, I know how it is. So I think you raised a really, really important point, which is a bias that's in sort of pervasive within so much of science. When it comes to people, it doesn't really affect me because I just look at potatoes, but this sort of idea of a bias towards, you know, your average white man, everything is compared to that. So, you know, with this heat index, is how does this value compare to the mortality in a walking, presumably middle-aged or
middle-aged man.
White man? This, you know, in presumably a country like this, it's not, you know, they don't send him somewhere else, and, you know,
I think it was just like, so it's how like an average white man, so like different, so it's different parts of the body. So like if you exposed your hand to a certain wind speed, certain temperature, certain amount of sun, and a certain like dew point temperature, what is then the temperature of your skin?
Okay.
Is basically that, and lots of different parts of that, and they know for this white man what his experience of that thermal environment would be.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah, it's fascinating really, because that is, you know, you could, you know, we could go out into the library and find 10 people that were all, you know, fit their description. Maybe not middle-aged because it's university, but and there's actually no one here. I'm looking out now. But, you know, hypothetically, we could find 10 middle-aged white men, subject them to the exact same environment, and their sort of self-report of how that felt to them would presumably vary wildly. You know, I can't walk up a flight of stairs without feeling hot. Whereas, you know, I know people that would be sat in here freezing cold right now just because we've got a window open.
Yeah.
So, how did they get a population of people, and you might not.
So, the original model is very complicated. So we use a polynomial estimation. So it's just basically a model of a model. But so it was based upon someone else's model that was based upon experiments on thermal comfort in predominantly white males, and so like your skin temperature, it's the average response of a white male's to the thermal environment. So it's all based upon a model that was brought together by years of previous research and sort of optimised for the most common person who probably lives in Europe, basically. But it's been found that this is actually quite a good threshold for likelihood. Okay, we do get comments, and I did address it in here. Everybody experiences heat or cold or anything in between differently. We all do, but it's not about, it's not about that. It's about indicating, is this raising a risk? And in this case, we know this is where the risk is starting to raise. And for different heat indexes, there are different values. So for instance, if you were to look at the wet bulb globe temperature, which is the most common used heat stress index, the one where it's like incredibly not good, it raises mortality significantly, even in Europe and in places like Taiwan, is 33 degrees Celsius. So, and in the UTCI, for that same threshold, that would be 46 degrees Celsius. So it's kind of like changing the meaning of what we understand by degrees Celsius, because actually temperature is relative, and temperature is different to hot. So heat is different to hot. How someone would understand hot is your experience, whereas heat is the thermal environment around you. So it's kind of capturing both of them and saying, when does this heat become a risk because it's too hot? Very complicated.
Very complicated. So I don't want to, stay on this whole UTCI thing too long, but I wondered if there was an element of acclimatization that's possible within populations of people, presumably, people that have always lived in hot places, or perhaps because of their ancestry are slightly more adapted to hot places. They might be better able to deal with, say, a 26 degree on this index, whereas if I got moved to Saudi Arabia tomorrow, I would struggle. Yeah. I can tell you, I would really struggle. Yeah. But then maybe after 10 years, I might struggle slightly less. I don't know. Is that something that you think could sort of affect the generalizability of this value, which obviously you have to pick a value because otherwise you can't do anything. But
so I think this value is useful, and we show in this paper that it is useful, and we also compare it to exposure time. So the thing is that people in these countries where they are more acclimatized to heat, that is true, are having a lot longer exposure time to these values than someone outside of the tropics. So as you go further north and south, the exposure time during a heat wave slowly goes down, which is what we show in these 3 Augusts. But that's kind of why. So even though they're acclimatized, they are experiencing these temperatures for a really long time. And what we know is that if you have hot temperatures, we didn't specifically look at this in this study, but if you have hot temperatures at night, then your body has less time to recover, and it can increase the amount of illness that is seen in a population because of overnight. And so in these regions, you're seeing these temperatures for a lot longer amount of time, and therefore you have less body recovery time. So that seems to have some sort of impact on acclimatization. But one of the outcomes of this paper was that I definitely think that we need to look at that more, these heat stress indexes, what the thresholds actually mean, whether we should be changing the thresholds per region maybe more to be more effective, whether we need to look at it with the people that study all of the impacts on exposure, acclimatization, with survey people. Definitely think there's more research that needs to be done in this area. But I think that we can make progress in forecasting and having the ability to inform people of risk whilst also making progress in that area. I don't think that they can happen separately. I think they should happen parallel, because when you start forecasting, it allows people to do more of this research, to make more of these findings, to do stuff that you never thought that they were going to do. And you parallel have this collaboration which makes science better and comes up with something better than you could both do alone. I think that's very key to the work and the outcomes of this paper.
Yes, definitely. You can't wait for the perfect model or index to use in your research, because you'll never get any research done.
Yeah.
If you just start with what you have, those tools that you have available to you will improve over time. They sort of have to, because that's the point of doing the research. And it is amazing how many people would criticize using any method you can think of, and say, well, this isn't the perfect method. But how are we ever going to get to a perfect, obviously there is no such thing as a perfect method, because things vary so much, and especially within human populations there's so much variability. But how are we ever going to get close to a perfect method
if we don't start?
Yeah. It is amazing how many reviewers have that mindset. This isn't absolutely perfect. Well, that's what do you want from me? I can't give you perfection. I can give you what I did. I've only been doing this for 2 years and I'm already fed up of reviewers. I got told not to talk about things like this by my head of department, so I should probably stop moaning. Yeah, it's...
we should probably... I'm sure everybody has that sort of reviewer story.
Absolutely.
To be fair, the reviewers on this were actually really great.
Oh, really?
They were quite good.
Yeah, you get... I had one when I wrote my review that was, like, at least... Because all you do is read what they've written, but it seemed like they wanted to make what I was doing better. And then there was one that was not trying to do that, or didn't seem like they were.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's frustrating with stuff like this because, so not with these reviewers, but previously, it is really, really difficult to explain that the UTCI isn't the same as temperature, and you're going, there's literally lots of papers on this research now saying we should use indexes like this. This is not the same as temperature. I have written it down that it is not the same as temperature, and you still think it's temperature, and it's just...
No, I had a very similar experience with my review, where I highlighted in the abstract and maybe the first paragraph of my review that the vast majority of the evidence I was going to be citing was not up to date. It was old, because there is, for some reason, there is a lack of research on what I look at in potatoes recently.
Yeah.
So I said a lot of these references are quite old, but that's because that's where the evidence is. And I showed how I found what I found, and I was like, well, I can't invent papers that were published in the last 5 years. Yeah. They just don't exist. I'm not citing them because whatever, I have some kind of bias or I'm trying to mislead the reader. That it just doesn't exist. And I said it. I said, there's a lack of evidence, and then the reviewers still go, there seems to be a lack of up-to-date evidence.
Yeah. You're like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you read line 33 where I say that that's a problem? So I wonder, we sort of got into it quite quickly, which is good. But I wonder if you could just make it really clear what you actually did. So you've talked a little bit about, how you've used these indexes or this index and correlated it to risk, but how do you actually go about finding, all the information that you need to do an analysis like that, and then, not without getting too into the spreadsheets, what do you actually do with it when you've got it? So
the really great thing about this paper was that my supervisors who developed the UTCI before released it as a free data set. So it's in a NetCDF format, so it's called a gridded data set, and basically for the globe you get like 0.25 degrees, so 25 kilometre little boxes, and each one has a UTCI value. But actually for every hour of the day...
Oh wow.
Every day
Big
of the
data
year.
Set.
It's massive. I once cropped it to the area of Africa. That took me a week to crop it and then do the daily min, the daily max and the daily mean. I don't recommend you do that. It is...
No, I will avoid doing that if I can.
Yeah. Well, maybe, but you might want to use it for like potatoes. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, and now you've said that. I'm
not sure it's
the
best. I don't think it's the best index for potatoes. It's kind of based on... is a potato like a white middle-aged man?
Similar in some ways. Round-ish, sort of schlubby, versatile, I think. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about potatoes.
So it's freely available, and then basically what I did was I looked at it for 3 reported heat waves, so August 2003, August 2010 and August 2020.
Oh, it was ever so hot.
What?
Last year
it was, I
really
know
hot.
And we had a record-breaking number of tropical nights in the UK since
horrible.
1976. It was pretty...
I know what you mean when you were talking earlier about the recovery thing. Go to bed in a hot room, and you wake up and you just feel terrible. Yeah. Terrible. And I, like I said, I'm not very good with the heat, but last year it was uncomfortable.
I feel like it was, so we had one this year, but we didn't have those nights, and I do think those nights made like a huge difference. But so, back to the data set. So we looked at...
that should be like on a t-shirt, I think.
What?
For scientists, back to the data set.
Back to the data set.
I think that'd be good. I think I could sell a few of those.
There you go. You're gonna
first merch idea.
Merch.
Bit early for that, I think.
Merch for the podcast. I think you should do it.
Maybe I'll look into it.
You have to put climate stripes on it. You know that.
Oh yes, of course.
Reading.
Yeah, of course. You can't move on this campus without encountering climate stripes.
Climate stripes.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
So then we looked at what the heat stress levels were during those 3 months, and we looked at how that was different to the average period from 1981 to 2020. No, not 2020. 2010, which is like called a climate period. And then we looked at exposure time, so how long each of these regions was experiencing above 26 for. And then what we also looked at was the area of the total landmass, excluding Antarctica. And
poor Antarctica.
Yeah.
Never gets any love.
No, it's actually just too cold for this heat index.
Oh,
That's
really?
Why it just,
wow.
looks ridiculous on plots, so we just crop it out. And yeah, so no penguins in this paper. Sorry, everybody.
Penguin discrimination. I won't stand for
it. And so we looked at the land area, and then also the populated land area, which was used. So we used like basically a map outline in a coding package, and then also a population data set.
Mm-hmm.
And populated area was over basically when anybody lived, so over like 0. Well, 1, because you can't have like half a person living somewhere.
What about a child?
Child. I think child are counted as whole people.
They count. Really?
In this data set.
I didn't know that.
So, and then basically, what was incredible was, and actually correlated with previous research, was that you're seeing this increase in heat stress quicker over the populated areas, and so like the curve is steeper over populated areas than over the total landmass. So what this is showing is we know that heat waves are increasing with climate change in frequency, so how much they occur, how long they occur for, and how hot it is. Well, the temperature, so how high the heat is, I guess. But what no one's really shown before is the area is also growing. So now you're having even more people exposed to this risk than you did before, and basically still no one's reporting that. So we thought that as an outcome of that, we should have a mandate for reporting, that we needed an early warning system, which is also a mandate from the World Meteorological Organization, and the World Health Organization has been since 2004. And there was something... Oh, and also a lot of reports rely on this database called the Emergency Disaster Events Database, MDAT for short. And they even say we underreport heat waves. We don't report all the impacts of heat waves. But then you'll read a UN report, and at the end, somewhere in an appendix, it will say, just by let you know that all of these figures might be underreported because we used MDAT. And then, but on all of their press releases, they're like, flooding was the most common hazard. Heat waves did kill the most people. Like, heat waves still is reported to kill the most people. So if they were all the deaths reported, I don't want to know how many people they actually had died. Like, there was a paper that suggested that 1/3 of all climate deaths were because of heat waves. No, 1/3 of all heat wave deaths were caused by climate change.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it. And that was a really cool study, really big.
So 1/3 of the people that died because of heat waves probably would not have died if the climate wasn't changing in the way it is. Yeah. So I just want to make that.
Yeah, that's
clear.
very clear. Sorry. There's so many cool papers on this area. It's mind-blowing. Like, there was this paper that said that showed different hazards and how they were increasing, and this all feeds into my work, and how it was increasing different hazards. And it was incredible because heat waves, it was showing the little variable x-axis. It was like 10-fold to 30-fold, and all the other hazards were 1-fold to like 4-fold. So it's like 10 times as much. And I'm going, okay, so do you not think we really should be reporting the impacts of this? Because it's actually increasing a lot faster than any of the other hazards. So it makes sense to be like tangibly, to me, that's quite powerful with someone who's making policy changes, because you can see it's a lot faster than all of the other ones. It's having the most impact in a drastic way. Like with COVID, we had lots of people die. It's kind of similarly, well, it's not the same rate, of course, because they're different, but we're having that with heat waves. We're having these impacts. And if we make them tangible and visible to people, and we're saying, we actually can visibly see that these have increased, then you're actually making climate change understandable in a way that maybe it wasn't before.
Yeah, that's this question might be slightly outside of the scope of your paper, or this is sort of your opinion, I guess I'm asking you for. How, when even meteorological organisations don't seem to be reporting heat waves as seriously as they probably should be, how do you get that message out that people are dying from heat waves caused by climate change? How do you communicate that? When people read your paper and they don't understand that 26 degrees is not the temperature, how are you then going to get the message out that we need to take this more seriously?
Well, it's really great. So we said that there was a mandate for reporting heatwave impacts as an international protocol in this paper. And someone else did a piece of research after this. And yesterday he went on Twitter and said, I support the call for an international protocol for reporting heatwave impacts. And I think that in this area, it's quite small and there's quite a lot of need for collaboration. And I think that if we all consistently come out and say, do you know what, we're not happy with this, you are not doing the people that are dying from these heat waves justice, because nobody knows they're dying, then I think that we can make a real difference, like for
Sorry, just a fella came in to clean the door handle.
Maybe he will.
Is that a COVID thing? Must be a COVID thing.
COVID thing.
Yeah, I thought
you couldn't
get COVID from door handles.
No, I don't think you can. I think it's like the lowest risk place you can get COVID from.
Yeah, I mean, I had COVID in January.
Oh no.
Or February, end of January, early February, and the NHS, whoever it is, I don't know if they work directly for the NHS or it's some sort of contracted thing. They ring you up and they just they tell you how long you have to isolate for. I don't know if they still do this, but back then, so they ring you up like 4 times a day, and they just say like, don't go anywhere, obviously, and they just sort of chat to you. I guess it's more for people that are maybe more isolated than I was, because I had someone else in the house. So if you're older, and anyway, I asked them, do I need to let down, because I live in a maisonette flat, so there's a downstairs a family of people, and we share a front door. That's the only space we share is sort of a tiny porch, and the front door is like front door, a little bit of space, and then my door and their door. And I said, do I need to let them know, because I don't have their number, I don't know how I'm going to communicate with them without being face to face, which I don't want to do, because we share a front door. And they were like, don't worry about that. Do you share a kitchen? I was like, no. Are you going to be spending a lot of time in the same space as them? No. We have no contact other than the front door. Do I need to clean the handle? Because I asked them this, I didn't want to get anyone sick. And they were like, no, we don't worry about that at all.
Well, we're extra
University
safe.
of Reading does.
University of Reading.
Extra safe.
Very safe.
Sorry, that was a total deviation, but I agree. This is really important and seems actionable.
Yeah, I think that's what's really great about actually resolving heatwave impacts is a lot of it's actually actionable. So putting in place cooling centres has been shown to be really good. Also, when you give out a heat warning, giving people practical advice, that really helps to reduce mortality and illness. As does actually just telling people. And also, like, for instance, putting in place safe limits for workers and improving workers' rights globally as well would really help with people that work outdoors. And it's simply just really, really actionable stuff. And a lot of normal people that aren't vulnerable can drink more water, stay in the shade, just really sensible things that actually I think a lot of people are told when they're kids to do. It actually really helps, but there is a limit where people do just start dropping dead, and we know that is called 35 degrees Celsius in 100% relative humidity. And we do think that on some projections of climate change that wide regions of the tropics could become uninhabitable because of heat. In fact, in Pakistan, they reached that limit, but it's only been for a couple of hours at a time. So it wasn't as bad because it's 6 hours exposure that actually causes someone to drop dead. If on average, as we've said, it depends on individual people. And it's really important then that we don't let those regions become uninhabitable just because it's too hot to live there. And that's what this paper really is aiming to do, is aiming to increase awareness of the actual risk of heat, and also that, as you said, for the meantime, there are actionable things we can put in place, and that we do need adaptation to heat, but that we also really do need that mitigation to stop this situation getting any worse.
Yeah, and I'm sure there will be people, probably not that listen to this, but there will be a section of the population here that might say, oh, well, it's not going to be here. We're not going to have these, the UK is not going to become inhospitably hot. But as soon as that happens anywhere, we're going to have a migration crisis of people fleeing an area that is, it's not just that there's a political issue or a temporary environmental issue. There's a permanent issue that makes an area of land where, presumably a large number of people lived inhospitable, and they're just going to leave and they're going to move, and then it's a problem for everyone. Yeah. Unless you're a penguin on Antarctica.
Unless you're a penguin. Although, even there is studies to suggest that it will be too hot for penguins to live. So all the penguins in Antarctica could actually die.
That's so sad.
It is actually really sad.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, if you're a penguin, you actually don't have the ability to leave and find somewhere where especially in Antarctica, because that's like really far from anywhere. So, we've condemned potentially the emperor penguins to death.
That's so sad. That's so sad. Why is that? I've never been to Antarctica.
Neither have I. No.
But for some reason, knowing that there might not be any penguins there makes me very, very sad. Which is,
it also makes me sad because most of our tea in the UK comes from Kenya, and it might actually be the wrong climate, so that includes heat, to grow tea. So there could be like up to a 90% reduction in.
Why is that not in here? That should be like the headline.
Because it came out after I wrote this paper, but in all future papers...
You need that in there.
Just need that in there. I'm sorry.
That has to be... If that would change the population of this country's attitude towards heat waves.
That's what the Express,
seconds.
Like the Daily Express. I think they wrote about it.
Did they?
They were like, drastic... Well, no, the Metro... So they were saying how there's been pasta shortages, apparently in Morrison's, and they were blaming it partly on the heat wave and partly on the drought in Canada, because apparently a lot of our wheat for pasta comes from Canada. And so that was the headline, climate change means we have no pasta. And then you go down to the bottom.
Everyone's like, we can live without pasta.
No.
Oh, really?
The Metro readers really love pasta.
Oh, really?
And so you scroll down to the bottom, and it was a Morrison spokesperson going, that's not why. It's because we don't have any delivery drivers. So that's why you're not going to be short on pasta. Like,
why would they not make that point in the article? It seems like the story is essentially the same. Why does it have to be drought and heat waves and not lorry drivers? Just slightly more sensational, I guess.
I don't know, but then I looked it up, and there has actually been a small reduction in wheat yields. I think it was between 40 and 60%.
No, talking my language. Talking about wheat yields.
Wheat yields, but you don't like...
I don't like wheat.
But potatoes are really good in heat waves, actually.
Are they?
Because they're under the ground, so...
Okay, that's interesting. My understanding was that if it gets too hot, they sort of shut down.
Yes.
And they go slightly weird. They get knobbly. But they will still grow.
Yeah.
But...
They're better than other crops. So they're better than, like,
so relatively.
maize.
Right.
They're still not great. And also, like, sometimes you can get certain diseases. So potatoes, sweet potatoes. And that's more common if it's a certain temperature as well.
Yes, that's definitely true. Yeah. If you ever go out with an agronomist, they'll take great delight in showing you an app on their phone that tells you, the humidity and the temperature and the wind speed and what that means for the likelihood of blight.
This is we need a UTCI for potatoes.
You can do that. This
potatoes, tea.
Tea, yes, I would support that.
Spin-offs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe we could write one together. You can do all the hard work and I'll, add a little bit of potato knowledge, just a tiny bit.
How are we going to get penguins in there?
I don't know. We're going to have to use the remainder of our travel budgets to go to Antarctica.
Let's just get someone listening.
Yeah.
If you want to send us to Antarctica.
If there is anyone listening who has the means and will to send us to Antarctica, we will go.
We will go.
And we will save the penguins.
We will.
That is not a promise. I can't promise that.
Neither of us can promise that.
No, but we'll give it our best shot. We'll give it a really good go.
We'll take those charity adverts where you really want to save a donkey.
The donkey ones are the saddest.
They really are. We'll do that, but for penguin.
Yeah. I don't know if it will work as well, because I feel like donkeys are an inherently sad-looking animal.
Yeah.
You see it could be a donkey that's lived its entire life in optimum donkey conditions, and they could still make those adverts because the donkey would still look sad.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about how sad a donkey... But penguins,
maybe this is what we're missing.
Jovial.
Maybe this is what we're missing. Donkeys, great mascot for climate change.
Absolutely.
Because they always look sad.
Yeah, you could just, put a donkey in front of a green screen and put it in front of a flood. Oh, yeah, if you were watching the news and there was a donkey up to its neck in floodwater, you'd be like, we need to sort these floods out. Look how sad that donkey is.
Look at how sad this donkey is.
Yeah, or just, donkeys presumably don't sweat, but a panting donkey.
Panting donkey.
These heat waves getting out of hand. We need to sort this out now. And then add that to the tea. And you've got...
It's a donkey drinking tea.
That's a perfect
And he goes
advert.
Outside and he's really sad because it's up to his neck in floodwater one day, and then he goes outside the next day and it's baking hot and he's just
crying.
Just a crying.
This could be the most effective advert of all time for combating climate change. Everyone will stop driving cars. Coal will cease to be burnt anywhere. We've got to help this donkey out.
We've got
to pick a particularly sad-looking donkey, but
If anybody has a sad donkey,
yes,
we also will take donkeys.
We do. Where are we going to keep it?
If anybody at the University of Reading has somewhere to keep a donkey,
we have a lot of requests today. Well, I'll give it to my mum. She's got a little bit of room for a donkey. Okay. Yeah, she's got goats and pigs and stuff. I think she's always wanted a donkey, actually. So after
we don't need a donkey.
We don't need a donkey. We can get her to get a donkey. We can use it for our world-saving purposes, and then it can live out the rest of its days.
It will be a happy donkey.
Extremely happy.
It will still
maybe
look
too
sad.
happy. Wouldn't that be weird if we found out you could make donkeys too happy and they just sort of couldn't cope with it because they're a traditionally sad animal? No?
I don't know.
So getting back to science and not donkeys, though I'm sure there are people that study donkeys. The donkeyologists.
I don't know. What's Latin for donkey?
I don't know.
No.
Horse is like equus, but I don't know if donkey's related. Wouldn't be surprised if they're in the same genus, but I don't know.
I don't remember.
No, it'd be something like that though.
Okay.
Anyway, this is something that you highlighted a couple of times, the populated areas issue. Now, everyone I think sort of knows that London is hotter than places that aren't London.
Yeah.
Apart from really hot places. No, people sort of have this idea that if you're from the countryside and you go to London, it's going to be a couple of degrees hotter than you're used to. I feel like this is probably a question that I could have Googled, but I never bothered to, and it's always bothered me.
Okay.
Why is it that, London is hotter than Surrey when they're right next to each other? Presumably it's something to do with the local environment.
Yeah, so urban areas are hotter because of something called the urban heat island effect. So because you have a lot of concrete and built materials, they absorb more heat and therefore they have to re-radiate that. So it's hotter during the day, but also hotter overnight because, the release of heat is often maybe slower than the intake of heat. So urban areas are hotter than country surroundings. And actually, if you have a vegetated area in an urban area, the buildings around that are cooler than if you had just a road and then buildings either side. So it depends on all of the structures that we build with and materials we build with, what the actual temperature actually outside and inside the buildings will be.
So it's a function of the building materials we've traditionally used for, since presumably the end of the Second World War when things got built back up.
Yeah.
So it's not. I always wondered if it was, the activity, the sort of energetic movement of people and cars and buses and things generating heat, but it's actually just the heat that comes in anyway being sort of trapped.
There is some of that, so because cars. So there is a link with sometimes with levels of air pollution and higher temperatures because the air is stiller, so the air pollution can settle in the air for longer, effectively. But yeah, it's mostly to do with how the buildings interact. Again, how the buildings interact with all of the thermal environment and how they then produce heat in themselves.
So, and a park has some mitigating effect on that. What is there presumably it depends on a million factors, but is there a radius around a sort of green area that feels this effect, or do you literally have to be adjacent to? Do we need parks everywhere? I mean, as lovely as that would be, I don't think it's going to happen.
So I think it was parks and wetlands. I think there was research to suggest it was up to 200 metres away.
Okay.
But even having tree-lined avenues on streets, all those vertical gardens and stuff like this, that's more practical than having a park every night.
Yeah, I don't think that would
or green
be very
roofs
popular.
As well is really great.
Green roofs?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've seen a few of those. I helped install one once in a previous life, and Sedum roof, lots of moss and
you've done great.
All sorts of stuff. I've helped. I've tried my best. They're interesting. They're people don't really like putting them up because they're faff compared to tiles, more expensive.
Yeah, they are.
And lots of times if they don't get put in properly because they're flatter, you end up with rain coming through. But that's not an issue with the roof; it's an issue with the construction, which is if more people do get nice green roofs, I'm sure that will go away. So I live in southwest London, and it's sort of between proper suburbia and proper London.
Oh, okay.
But
it'll be hotter there.
It will. It is hot there. It's definitely hotter than where I grew up. But we are close to Richmond Park, so I don't know if we're 200 metres. Can't be far off that.
You're pretty good.
Yeah, and we're between the park and the river, so presumably the river
great.
helps.
Yeah, the river's great.
Yeah, still gets really hot though.
Yeah, it will do.
Really, really hot. I can't remember what I was going to say, so I will say something else, which is that we seem to have, you take into account that populated areas are growing, more people are moving to urban areas.
Yeah.
I think, have we reached 50% in cities in the UK now? I think we have.
I think it is, yeah.
But they keep growing. The climate is changing, making everywhere hotter. So we have more people living in hotter environments in a climate that is generally getting hotter.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with an underreporting of the issues that can cause in terms of mortality and maybe not even mortality, but like health issues that don't kill you, which are still real and terrible. What do we do? What are we going to do? I mean, you've touched on things that are actionable. Drinking more water, telling people to wear hats. Things that like Australians do because it's way too hot for Europeans there. But, and this is like the question of the age, is what do we do to stop this just becoming like a runaway train? And I mean, obviously we have to change energy sources and things like that, but as an individual, what can you do really? Well, I'm not going to be able to stop coal plants burning. But
You might be able to.
Maybe not how can I stop climate change, but how can I protect myself from...
Well, there's quite a lot you can do. So, I mean, it's more difficult if you're rented. But if you're not, I know, I'm sorry. So, I mean, it depends. So you could plant more vegetation near your house so that it would keep it cooler. You could fit shutters on the outside of your house. So in lots of places in Europe, they have shutters that they pull shut and have the windows open, so you still have the breeze, but it's shading the house.
Yeah.
But curtains can also have an impact and really keep your house cooler. But it's just about really being sensible. So like what I said, staying hydrated. In the UK at the moment, staying hydrated, not going out in the middle of the day. If you're feeling unwell from heat stress, just rehydrating, cooling yourself down. But if you do need medical assistance, of course you should access that. And there's also, but I think a lot of the things are that we have now got this extreme heat warning in the UK. It started this year, so hopefully they will help improve communication of heat risk. But we need changes to sort of stuff like building guidelines here and globally. And these are all things that actually you as an individual could write your MP about. You could vote for people that you think are going to put in better policies for climate change. Consumerism, if there's a company that you don't think is being sustainable, don't buy from them. And lots of the things that you do to support causes that are trying to slow down climate change and make it so that heat waves don't become as frequent, are actually helping both climate change but also the impacts from heat, because we know that the more that we limit emissions, the less heat waves we will have and the less intense they will get. So it's really important. But we are at a point now where we also need these adaptations to protect people, but there are real things that everybody can do.
So you sort of have to take responsibility for your own safety a little bit at the moment until hopefully bigger organisations can try and stop these things from getting worse. You mentioned buildings, and we talked about the heat holding capacity of particularly concrete buildings. I am a massive proponent of using timber for all buildings.
Okay.
I just on the basis that it is much more efficient to build with. I think it's I don't know this, but I would assume that it's more environmentally friendly to build out of a carbon sink rather than concrete, which uses an enormous amount of carbon to produce. Can you validate my belief that wood is the way forward, or are there different materials, different strategies that we could use to help mitigate some of the effects of the increasing temperature?
So I do think that you could build with wood. A lot of the things to do with heat and also cold weather is the proper insulation.
Mm-hmm.
If you put the wrong insulation in your building, what you're doing is you're making it unbearably hot in the summer because the heat then can't escape. If you have proper insulation in any building, then what you'll do is you'll make it warm in the winter and cold in the summer. That's what proper insulation is designed to do. And a lot of houses, so 80% of the housing stock in the UK will still be around in 50 years, and 20% of that at the moment overheats, even when there isn't a heat wave in the UK. And all of the houses that are being built now, I'm not sure they're wholly out of wood, but they're not sustainable. Some of them are built on floodplains, so there's all of these factors. So they're not good for heat waves, they're not good for flooding, so also we think that people should have air source pumps. So instead of having a gas boiler, basically you have this pump, and it can be heating your home or cooling your home, and it works with electricity and water, and that is produces a lot less carbon than a gas boiler will. But new houses aren't being built with those, so most of them, for like people like Taylor Wimpey and big organisations, I don't know who else. There's a lot of Taylor Wimpey houses being built around me, so they've come into my brain.
Other developers are available.
Yeah. So a lot of these things, but the building industry isn't regulated in legislation. It's all done on like best practice, good practice. And actually, they're not doing good practice. They're trying to put a bunch of houses on a field to make the most money. Although sometimes they do put in place like increasing biodiversity, which is a new law that's come in place, that they have to either have the same biodiversity or increase it on a development now, which would be really good. But it's also not helping with like air source pumps and insulation and places to charge electric cars and stuff that actually would be useful for all heat waves and climate change. So I think there needs to be leadership from government, and that's been said by lots of scientists over time, and we're probably going to keep saying it over time. We'll see what happens.
The insulation thing is really interesting to me, because, as I said, I worked in construction for sort of through the holidays of my undergraduate career, and then for about 6 months after I finished my undergraduate degree, and we were retrofitting this loft, this attic space, for a family that owned this very old, I would assume it was Tudor manor. So we're up in the attic, and it was boiling hot. Yeah. It was absolutely baking, and the tiles would just absorb the heat, radiate it into the room that we were in. And I was, a lot less wise than I am now, still not particularly wise, but we were putting up insulation. That was my job. I was cutting insulation to go between the rafters, the joists of the ceiling and the purlings. I can never remember which one's which. And I said to the guy that was my boss for the day, why are we doing this? It's boiling hot in here already. Why are we putting insulation in? It's just going to get hotter. And he said, no, when we put the insulation in, it will get cooler because it will keep the heat out. And then in the winter, it will keep the heat in. It will just keep the heat wherever the heat is. I was like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm an idiot for not realising that. But I think that's another problem we have, particularly here, is that older houses were built to keep the heat in.
Yes.
Because I guess it used to be colder. And we still have a lot of old houses.
Well, some houses are like that, so like that Tudor Manor, but there's actually a lot of housing stock that neither keeps the house warm in the winter or cold in the summer. They're just a bit terrible.
Just whatever temperature it is outside.
Whatever temperature it is outside, it basically is
sounds
inside.
like my flat. Just, there is nothing you can do.
It's just so, maybe we just didn't build houses well, because if you think about after the World War II, there was a lot of a push to quickly build houses, and they said at the time, well, eventually we'll just need to knock these houses down and build better ones, and they never did that. So we're now living, well, my house isn't from World War II, but a lot of people are living in houses that weren't actually meant to be around this long. They were meant to be replaced with better houses.
That was never going to happen, was it?
No.
Such an age-old story. We'll knock this up temporarily, and then when, things are going all right, we'll tear it down and do it again. And you just end up in the temporary thing forever.
Yeah.
So it always goes. One thing I really wanted to ask you about that you highlight in your paper is that in the 2003 and 2020 heat waves, you see this, and you have a nice map. I love papers with maps. For some reason,
my favourite thing to make is maps.
The map.
Ooh.
Maybe I can superimpose that somewhere. I'm not sure if my editing skills are up to that.
Just like here.
Yeah.
Maps.
There's something about maps that helps me understand. I used to read a lot of history books, and if there was a map, I'd be like, oh, I know what happened here. Really, you see the Viking invasion of wherever, and you go, oh yeah, there's a map, there's arrows, there's dates. That makes more sense.
I'm not. This is slightly different. No Vikings.
No Vikings. That is a problem, but I looked past it. But you make a point of saying that there's this big red patch over central Russia, Siberia.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking about the permafrost. That's something we're told about all the time now, is this sort of area of Siberia that is filled for some reason with methane. And if it ever melts, then we're in a positive feedback loop of increasing climate. So the first question is, the big red patch you're seeing, is that a cause or an effect of the climate change? Are we looking at this permafrost, the methane coming out and being sort of relatively localised and increasing the temperature? Or is it just that that's an area that is hotter for whatever reason? But could it have an effect then on the permafrost? If you know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I don't think it's like I'm not sure I'm not 100% sure, so someone who researches methane could probably say more, but I don't think it's 100% a localised feedback. So there's kind of one of the patterns you would see of heat waves. So there's different places where you would see heat waves centred in Europe, and one of them is over Russia and Siberia, because you have this area of pressure called the Siberian High, and that's where it's centred, and that's to do with atmospheric feedbacks. And basically, when it's there and you have what's called a blocking high, leads to a build-up of these temperatures and the right conditions for a heat wave to occur. So in the case of this, then what you had was the permafrost was melting, but you also had the right conditions for wildfires to spread. So the permafrost was also burning, and that happened this year as well. So you had wildfires and the permafrost melting, and I think this year was also really bad in that area because the blocking high this year was centred more over Russia than, say, the UK. So they had lots of record-breaking high temperatures in Siberia, which is really bad, as you said, for the methane, because methane has a higher warming effect than greenhouse gases like CO2. So, yeah, if the permafrost melts, it is likely that you would have some sort of positive feedback loop.
So, if anything, and this is an odd thing to say, it's if the permafrost is melting, it's better if Siberia is on fire, because that methane would be converted to carbon dioxide in the fires.
Oh yeah, maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, Russians.
Please don't set Siberia on fire.
Don't set Siberia on fire. We need to make it very clear we are not condoning anyone setting Siberia on fire. That would be very reckless and irresponsible.
Don't do it. Because not all of it would be converted to carbon dioxide.
No,
so
certainly
it's still
not.
bad.
It would still be bad, yes. We would like to keep it locked
Frozen.
up. Do you have any idea how it got there?
Permafrost?
Yeah.
So it was to do with the last ice age, and basically it's to do with organic matter breaking down, and then it stores that, and then it's a similar feedback to a wetland in a way. So it takes this in, methane mostly, other gases are available, and it just traps it there, and because of the last ice age, this organic matter was basically trapped under ice, and then it's the environment, so like a tundra environment, it's still trapped there because it's trapped in ice particles. Like glaciers, you have little bubbles of gas in glaciers, and actually if you take a core of a glacier, you can tell what the atmospheric composition of the atmosphere was at that time, depending on the slice of the ice. It's similar to that, but it's just mixed with organic matter instead of just water.
I always find those methods slightly, not sad. Sad's not the right word, but an adjective similar to that. Is sad an adjective? I don't know. Not very good at English. I'm a scientist. But the idea that you're taking a core out of a glacier and you are measuring the bubbles of air in the core, and that is releasing them for the first time in...
It is quite sad.
Potentially thousands of years, that you've got something locked away. And the only reason you can do the research is because it's been locked away. And every time you take a core out of it, there's a little bit less.
That's a good point.
And you lose that. I mean, obviously, glaciers are quite big at the moment. I mean, how big they'll be in the future, we don't know.
We don't know. Because we haven't been to Antarctica.
No. So please send us to Antarctica. The other thing you mentioned, you sort of recommend in your discussion and conclusion, is this idea of an early warning system for heat waves. Now, this is a terrible analogy, but when I want to know what the weather is, and I pull out the Met Office app, and I say to the Met Office app, what temperature is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to rain tomorrow? And I don't know what frequency they're wrong, but it seems high. How does an early warning system for extreme heat events work, considering, and they're probably unrelated, that the Met Office can't accurately predict?
I don't know whether you should actually criticise the Met Office. But also,
well, I just did.
I know. Did. So, weather forecasting can notoriously be challenging. In fact, me and my friend are the 2-time lowest scorers for the Met Department weather game, which looks at forecasting weather. We've won the wooden spoon twice in a row. This is our 3rd attempt. And so it's really difficult. But
what's the game?
It's called the Weather Game. You can sign up. The Met Department run it every semester.
Right.
And you can sign up and they give you places and then you have to use the weather forecast to like accurately predict what the observed forecast on that day will be.
Right.
And
you're really bad at that.
I'm so bad at it. And it's really bad because I like my PhD partner and an organisation that I work with currently is the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. And I'm like, and they're like really great at forecasting. And I'm like, hi. so but their forecasts, which are not the same as the Met Office in the UK's forecasts, their forecasts have been shown to be able to predict heat waves 7-day lead time. But also sometimes the signal from a heat wave, so it's not exactly in the right place or at the right time, but it's kind of right, can be like up to 3 months lead time. So there's potential that we could then put in place like cooling centres a week in advance and tell people like GPs or whatever to look out, or just family members to look out for elderly people that live alone and stuff like this. So that would be so we'd give out forecasts of heat stress indexes. I would like to use lots of heat indexes and make like a mega heat stress index, which would be really cool. Just combine them and make like why use one when you can use them all? And then just like forecast that.
I think the answer to that question is because it took you a week to
because it took me a week.
Get Africa with one index. So
yeah, but I don't have a supercomputer. These people have.
If anyone has a supercomputer,
these people have supercomputers, so
there's not one here.
Well, ECMWF currently have their supercomputer
up
the road.
You're not allowed to have a play.
Can I have a play on the supercomputer?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that should be the subject line to the email.
You have to parallelise all your... It's really complicated. You have to parallelise all your code.
I don't even know what that means. Yeah, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you wanted to be asked? Or that you would like to talk about?
So in depth. Other than we want a trip to Antarctica.
We do. And we need a donkey.
And we need a donkey. And we need a global heat hazard awareness system.
We do.
Yes.
That would be very helpful.
And the mascot's going to be that sad donkey.
Yes. Yeah. Good animal to choose, I think. Always a good mascot is a donkey. People love donkeys. And people like it when it's hot, but maybe not when it's a heat wave.
Not this hot.
No, this is too hot.
Too hot.
Too hot for people.
Too hot to handle.
Wow. That's going to be the title of the episode. Too hot to handle.
Okay.
With Chloe Brimicombe.
You can do that if you want.
Excellent. Not sure how appropriate it is. What did I call Donna's? Just Neolithic pigs, I think.
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah. I thought it was pretty cool. And it is accurate. It's all we talked about was Neolithic pigs. But too hot to handle.
Too hot to handle.
And hopefully next week I'll be talking about cows that eat seaweed.
Yeah, what are you going to call that?
Cows that eat seaweed.
Sea cows.
Possibly sea cows. Or is that not what they call manatees or something?
It could be confusing.
People would be ever so confused. Like, why would you
cows.
salt beef. That's actually not bad. I'm going to write that down. I don't know how he'll feel about that.
You're not great with it.
Salted beef. Salt or salted? I don't know.
Salted beef.
Well, thank you for doing this. This was very interesting. Very sort of outside what I normally do, but it is very relevant. And you do talk about crops a little bit. You mentioned the word crops in the beginning.
Mention the word crop.
Would be interesting to look at this sort of index and replace middle-aged white men with potatoes.
You can use the wet bulb glow temperature. That works for rice crops, so
okay,
it would work for potatoes. But
rice,
I don't know whether...
another pointless crop.
I think you'd have to use it for like the people that take the like cool under the wet bulb glow temperature underground.
You're losing me. This sounds too complicated.
I'm just like ideas person.
Just ideas, yeah. I'm not going to write that down because that's too much for me. But if you think it's doable, maybe we can do it.
We need some funding.
If anyone wants to fun. A lot of requests from this one. Anyway, we are being eyeballed from outside the room, so we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chloe. This was great. So your paper is Borderless Heat Hazards with Bordered Impacts. I don't know if I said that at the beginning. I might have forgotten to.
You did say that.
I did. In Earth's future. Thank you very much for watching and or listening. Probably not and. It'd be weird if you watched it and then thought, I'd like to listen to that again.
If you do, let us know.
Let us know in the comments. If you're on YouTube, please like the video, share it to anyone you think might be interested, and write a comment. That would be fantastic. And if you are listening wherever you get your podcasts, thanks for listening. I don't think you can like podcasts on any podcast apps. If you can, do. And if you are able to make a comment, that would be fantastic. And hopefully I will be back in a couple of weeks with the salt beef episode with the man that feeds seaweed to cows.
Which will be cool.
So thank you, and I will see you in the next one. I always used to end them by saying peace, but I feel like it's slightly obnoxious now with someone else, because I used to make videos just on my own, and at the end I would just go, peace.